Ladies and gentlemen, this is a flying saucer.
That's the one I saw. What was the evening I swear that's the same one. It's the one I saw.
It's made of pewter, made in Japan, and thrown across the lawn by one of my children.
I saw Bigfoot once. 1951. Back in Sequoia National Park. Had a foot on her. 37 inches. Heel to toe.
Wow.
Made a sound I would not want to hear twice in my life.
I think many of us who look at UAP seriously are embarrassed and are hesitant to talk about other aspects of the phenomena, including potential Bigfoot sightings, because we feel ridiculous about it. Heck, I feel a little afraid even talking about it right now.
Science requires data, which should be collected without bias or prejudice. Yet, whenever the topic of UAP arises, those who wish to explore the phenomena are often confronted with resistance and ridicule. For example, members of the NASA UAP Independent Study Team, particularly those in academia, were mocked and even threatened for simply having the temerity to engage in the study of UAP. Our best tool for unlocking the mystery of UAP is science, but we cannot conduct a proper inquiry if the stigma is so overwhelming that just daring to be part of a NASA research team elicits such a vitriolic response. Therefore, one of the most important actions that can be taken relative to exposing the truth of UAP is to combat the stigma. And this is where I believe that NASA can be eminently helpful.
My name is Mike Gold. I'm the president of Redwire Space. Prior to that, I served in a variety of positions at NASA, associate administrator for space policy and partnerships, acting associate administrator for the Office of International and Interagency Relations. The names just roll off the tongue, and senior advisor for international legal. Before that, I served in a variety of positions in the commercial space field. When I was at NASA, myself and the NASA administrator, who's the top official at NASA, made a very strong push to ensure that we put visual cameras on the Artemis mission. You might be surprised that we did encounter some non-trivial pushback, because when you've got a mission as complex, as challenging as Artemis, every ounce of power, every little bit of mass is critical. And the pushback we were getting was there was no specific scientific need per se for the types of visual cameras that we want to put on. But we reminded everyone at NASA that the camera is the mission. And while not everyone can be an astronaut, we could take the whole country, if not the whole world, with us on the journey of Artemis by including those cameras. And we were, of course, ultimately successful in ensuring that those cameras were on the mission, an important part of the mission. And then I was very proud, coincidentally, to end up at Redwire Space, where we built the 11, 12 cameras externally and internally that captured the amazing imagery from the historic Artemis 1 and Artemis 2 missions. I come by my interest in space honestly and genetically, that my grandfather worked on the Apollo program. My mother works for a NASA contractor to support STEM engagement and activity. And I'm a longtime Star Trek fan, so you can't ever get away from that. And I grew up on a reservation in northeastern Montana. We actually moved to Billings, Montana when I was about 8. And I remember telling my parents, we can't leave the reservation. We have to stay here with our people. And that's when she broke it to me that I'm Jewish, not Lakota Sioux. And I really haven't recovered ever since then from the break with my tribe. And certainly indigenous people have, I think, an entirely different view when it comes to the paranormal and nature really in general. So when you grow up in a place like Montana and you have such a clear, incredible view of the stars that you would look up at night at the reservation and see the Milky Way and just believe anything is possible. And then when it comes to UAP, there was, of course, the Malmstrom incident that we grew up hearing about in Great Falls, Montana, where there was a UAP sighting that shut down silos that were supposed to be independently wired. And then, of course, a variety of cattle mutilations occurred when I was growing up in Montana. And for those of you in the audience who aren't familiar with ranching, if you lose one cow, that's your profit for the year. That's your livelihood. So that was a very serious issue. So I grew up around some anomalous phenomena, which is why I think it's interesting and incumbent upon us in the scientific community to take a hard look at what's going on. I don't want to come to any conclusion one way or the other, but anomalies, the strange, the weird, the inexplicable, that's where progress is made. That's how science is done, which is why I've always been an advocate for looking at this high strangeness and engaging with the public that finds it so fascinating. We need to investigate UAP. We need to investigate the unknown and the anomalies because that's how science is done. That's how progress is made. And we have to be open to following the data, no matter how mundane or how extraordinary it is. This is called the scientific method, that we look at the data and then come to a conclusion. And where I've been concerned with the UAP phenomena is I see just the opposite, that many, due to the stigma and the biases, particularly in the academic community, we begin from a place that UAP is nonsense or UAP is bunk, and then we work from that conclusion back to the truth, when in fact, it should be the exact opposite of that. I find it disappointing sometimes with the scientific community that we're doing the opposite of what the scientific method should be. And there is some extraordinary data available. We're seeing that from the Department of War drops, that there has been incredible testimony from the best pilots. We've got radar data, visual data, heat data. So let's take a look at the science and let that dictate our conclusions rather than the opposite. I think that some of the best science is done by citizen scientists. I think we make tremendous progress when the whole community is engaged. That's success. And frankly, that's why I like leaning in to UAP, Bigfoot, because it engages the public in ways that few, if any other, aspects of science do. And we are at such an incredible moment in technology between the proliferation of smartphones and computing power. We do and had done at NASA and at Redwire hackathons where we engage the public to come forward and participate. So I think there are great advantages to participant citizen science, not only in terms of public engagement, but you can get so many more resources from across the country and across the world that you can apply nearly for free and then be able to make tremendous progress. And when it comes to the paranormal, like UAP or Bigfoot sightings, it becomes even more important because you need everyone with a camera, everyone who's exploring to come forward with this data. We have got to get past the stigma relative to UAP and the paranormal in general. We were just at an event yesterday with Lou Elizondo as part of his Persona Non Grata tour, and Lou made the point, which I absolutely agree with. Paranormal is just normal things that we haven't figured out yet. Quantum mechanics was once paranormal. Black holes were once paranormal. The fact that the Earth might rotate around the sun was once paranormal. So we need to get by the stigma so that good science can be done. And that stigma is still pernicious. When I was a member of the NASA UAP Independent Study Team, which was comprised mostly of academics, those in academia received threats that they would lose tenure or not receive tenure, that they wouldn't be able to publish papers, that they would lose their very jobs, not for saying that non-human intelligence is real, not for saying that there's an extraterrestrial intelligence on Earth, but simply for having the temerity to investigate the issue of UAP. How can we do good science when there's so much bias that just asking the question is seen as a revolutionary or unacceptable act? That is anti-science. So it's one of the reasons I was so proud to be part of the NASA UAP Independent Study Team, because NASA carries with it such credibility that NASA just looking at the issue, I think, helped push back against the stigma. And then there's a critical national security issue here. If you've been watching the war in Ukraine, we are now in the era of drones, where more soldiers are being killed by drones than humans. For the first time, a human soldier surrendered to a robotic soldier. And in particular, there was an attack by Ukraine against Russia utilizing thousands of drones that were hidden in sea containers, in huts, houses, trucks. And they unleashed these on the Russian Air Force, creating billions and billions of dollars in damage. My concern is that many of the UAP sightings are likely adversarial drones, Chinese drones, that are looking at our critical infrastructure and national security activities to be ready when and if there's a shooting war with China over Taiwan, that China will be able to take out those critical facilities, striking a devastating blow against the United States. And to the extent the stigma against the UAP is creating a free pass for our adversaries to conduct these surveillance activities in preparations for a strike, is a clear and present danger. So again, I think we're dealing with a mix of the prosaic and the extraordinary, but even on the prosaic side, we have to be very, very careful. And this stigma is not just blocking science, but it is a national security threat. But even those of us in the UAP community, I think we suffer from our own stigma when it comes to phenomena like Bigfoot. And again, I'm not saying real or not real. I'm obviously not qualified to go into that. But as we've discussed, I am from Montana and certainly have heard a lot of Bigfoot stories. My father actually saw tracks, so I grew up with Bigfoot pictures of potentially footprints and lore. And I do think it is interesting in the UAP community, you often see this connectivity between UAP phenomena and appearance of cryptids, of what we would call Bigfoot, of orbs, etc. And I think many of us who look at UAP seriously are embarrassed and are hesitant to talk about other aspects of the phenomena, including potential Bigfoot sightings, because we feel ridiculous about it. Heck, I feel a little afraid even talking about it right now. So again, this is where I think it's important for paranormal researchers to pool their resources, get out of the stovepipes and start working together with the potential that there are through lines, that there's connections or synergies from all paranormal research that I believe deserves to be looked into. If scientists are afraid to look at a topic because how it would impact the reputation, their careers, then we have a problem. It's not a scientific problem. As a matter of fact, it's the antithesis of science. It's topics like this that have the most pushback that, frankly, I get the most excited about. As we look in cosmology, at first, the very idea that the Earth rotates around the sun could get you hung. then as you look at, again, everything from quantum mechanics to the existence of antimatter to the existence of black holes, I think you can almost safely say that most, if not all, revolutionary scientific ideas were outright rejected by orthodoxy to begin with. So, look, I'm a recovering attorney. I can't say whether paranormal activity or Bigfoot or even UAP is real or something extraordinary, but the public is interested. We need to encourage more science. And again, it is the antithesis of the scientific method where we reject investing something superficially and facially immediately. And as we talk about Bigfoot, maybe we need to do a rebranding as we did with UAP on the topic, because I think there is baggage, to say that there could be missing link or creatures that we are currently unknown or aren't familiar yet. Certainly, and I'm just a layperson interested in the topic, but evolutionary biology and the evolution of humanity is not clearly understood yet. So we need to keep asking the hard questions. And where I get most interested is, frankly, when there's that pushback. But we need to reach a place, whether it's UAP or any other paranormal topic, that it's a safe place for scientific investigation, because otherwise we will fail. And when it comes to UAP in particular, that is not just a scientific threat, this stigma, it's a national security threat when scientists are afraid to go there and are afraid to apply the scientific method. If you're afraid to use the scientific method, then you shouldn't be called a scientist. The meaning of disclosure, I think, can vary depending on the context, the field, and the individual. To me, disclosure isn't a single event, it's a process. It's a willingness by the scientific community and openness to first overcome the stigma so that we can study a topic with the resources that should be applied from top universities, from top scientists, and then come to a conclusion without bias and in a fully objective fashion. To me, that's disclosure. Because if you follow the facts, we could be dealing with something extraordinary, or we could be dealing with something completely mundane. Disclosure, again, to me, is a scientific and objective process to take us to that point of understanding, regardless of the nature of that truth. I think we are living through an extraordinary period of history, and we should not take for granted that we have now done several congressional hearings on UAP with senior officials, senior pilots, Top Gun, the best of the best, coming forward and talking about the extraordinary things that they've seen, of senior intelligence and national security officials coming forward saying that there is a there. And these courageous members of Congress, Congressman Burleson, Representative Luna, Representative Burchett, just to name a few, pushing this issue so publicly. And then you have to give a great deal of credit to the administration. I would like to compare what the Trump administration has done with disclosure to what past presidents have done, but I can't, because there is nothing to compare it to. There's never been anything like this done in history. And just from a personal perspective, 10 years ago, even 5 years ago, had you told me that I would be testifying before Congress on the potential existence of UAP, I might not have believed you. I probably got in a little trouble on the internet that when I was testifying, I couldn't stop smiling. I was so thrilled with the fact that we were having this conversation. Another moment from my testimony, after you testify before Congress, which I've done numerous times on various NASA, space policy, space law topics. Obviously, this is the first and only time I've done it on UAP. You get questions for the record afterwards. You give your oral testimony, and then members of Congress follow up with what are called QFRs, written questions for the record. And I was sitting in my office late at night filling out my QFRs, and there was a QFR on, is the phenomena extraterrestrial or is it interdimensional? I just never thought in my life I would be answering a QFR from Congress about the possibility of interdimensional beings. And I was so pleased by this because it shows an openness. It shows pushing back against the stigma at the highest level of our government. And I really appreciate the objectivity, the seriousness, and the interest shown by our members of Congress. I only wish we could see a fraction of that level of interest and seriousness reflected in the academic and scientific community. So it was an interesting question as to whether these are extraterrestrial or interdimensional beings that I received via a QFR, questions for the record. And my response is that my belief is that if indeed UAP is something extraordinary, and again, I believe that we're dealing with a variety of phenomena, which is why this topic is so difficult, that most, if not 99% of UAP are prosaic phenomena, and there's simple explanations, whether it's weather or balloons or drones or adversarial aircraft or spacecraft. But for some of these incidents, that very fascinating 1%, there may be something more extraordinary occurring. And I believe that the universe is vast, and that if we're the only intelligent life out there, that is a tremendous waste of space. And if there is, and I believe there is, other non-human intelligence out there somewhere, to visit Earth, these civilizations would have had to have conquered the speed of light. And that would be through some form of leveraging wormholes or what would look like interdimensional travel. So I believe that there's probably, or at least there could be, a mix of, if one were to travel between solar systems, it would likely require a level of technology that would seem to be interdimensional, or literally could be interdimensional. So I believe the answer might be both in that case, and that's how I responded to the QFR. Disclosure is gaining momentum now because of the courageous efforts of several individuals. Let me begin with Lou Elizondo, who has been at the forefront of this topic and has been so willing to suffer personally, and his family suffering, including death threats, because of his willingness to move forward and be public on this. People like David Grush and all of the other whistleblowers. Again, I'm not qualified to say what's true or what's not, but what I can firmly say is that these are patriots. They are extraordinarily experienced and qualified individuals, and I give them great credit for having the selflessness to come out and speak on these topics. And then we have several members of Congress on a bipartisan basis that have moved this forward in a way that we simply haven't seen before in history. And let me begin with the late great Senator Harry Reid, who was such an advocate for studying the critical issue of UAP, and people like, and unfortunately many of them passed away, Senator Stevens, Senator Inouye, and in the House today, absolute warriors for truth and transparency, people like Representative Burleson, Representative Luna, an incredible champion, Representative Burchett, and also in the Senate currently, Senator Schumer, Senator Gillibrand. What I love about the UAP topic is the way it unites us as Americans. I can think of only maybe one other topic where you bring together people as diverse as AOC on one side, and then someone who's incredibly conservative like Congressman Tim Burchett. And that's why I think space exploration and UAP are so important, because it teaches us how small, how ridiculous our biases and prejudices are, and brings us together as a people in a way that nothing else can, And Congress has been a microcosm of that. If I were to look at one question that needs to be asked, it's why aren't we asking additional questions? And in particular, as a member of the NASA UAP Independent Study Team, it's why haven't we gone through the NASA archives to look for UAP? Even a cursory review turns up some fascinating imagery. As part of the Department of War release, there was images of what looks to be a triangle, potentially, similar to what we've seen terrestrially in regard to UAP, taken by astronauts on the surface of the moon in Apollo 17 upwards. We've seen the lunar horizon glow, picked up going as far back as Surveyor, which was our initial lunar probes to the modern Commercial Lunar Payload Services program. We've got some potential images on the surface of the moon that are fascinating in their geometries. We need to ask the question, what else is there? And while we spend a lot of time trying to get through classified information or get a hold of information that it may be difficult to look at due to national security, there is a treasure trove of publicly available data that NASA has that has not been thoroughly reviewed, or in some cases reviewed at all. And this is why I again applaud the administration and the Department of War and the Trump administration and people like Tulsi Gabbard, RFK, Donald Trump Jr. and others who have been strong advocates. Marco Rubio, was incredible in the age of disclosure, and he knew the risks that he was taking, and he took them anyway. And that's why I have a great deal of respect for Marco Rubio and what he's done, not only in Department of State, but in his role for national security as well. So we need to ask those questions. And then one more question is, why haven't we added UAP to the Aviation Safety Reporting System, ASRS? ASRS is a system where safety anomalies are reported to NASA by pilots and crew. There have been hundreds of thousands of reports over decades. They're made confidentially, and the system has worked incredibly. And if we were to add UAP as another type of anomaly that could occur, we would turn every pilot, every crew member, even passengers, into sensors for UAP that would provide vital data relative to not only if there's something more extraordinary occurring here, but sensors for adversarial drone activity that, if we can do this, not only would move science forward, but would save lives eventually if there is ever, heaven forfend, a Chinese attack on U.S. soil. The NASA UAP Independent Study Team strongly recommended that we include UAP and ASRS. Huge kudos to Ryan Graves, who is a pilot, came forward, testified before Congress. He has been a constant advocate for that. I have been pushing this via my job as an advisor of Disclosure Foundation, as an advisor for Ryan Graves Group, Americans for Safe Aerospace. And it's a shame that this hasn't been done yet. So let's ask that question, get it done, and the cost to the taxpayer would be negligible of just adding a few words here. Yet the data that we could gather for science and national security would be invaluable. Because of the stigma, there's already great difficulty with pilots, astronauts, and anyone else reporting UAP aerial phenomena. And then for those who are brave enough or willingness to report, they don't know where to go. They don't know who to report this to. It's public that a former astronaut, Leroy Chow, had an incident when he was flying and saw a metallic globe go shooting by him. But like many others, he would have no idea where to take that information to, who to take it to. When I was a member of the NASA UAP Independent Study Team, I was asking the FAA, do you archive this information? Do you keep it? Do you maintain it? Where do pilots go? And I can say the answers during the past administration were not particularly crisp. And I fear that much, if not all of this information is being lost. So again, I hope that the administration, NASA, the FAA, particularly given that so many officials in the administration are doing the right thing, are taking UAP seriously, that we could make this small change to ASRS that would have such big implications. I applaud what Steven Spielberg and the media have done relative to the topic. And I think science fiction plays a very important role relative to science. It prepares us for the future. It asks questions about what's possible. It is the imagination that fuels scientific progress. And in regard to whether it's Disclosure Day, the X-Files, or even something like Independence Day, that it prepares us as a society for what's possible. And I think that's extremely important, whether there's actual intent or whether it's just part of telling a good story. I think it's very important. And to the extent that Disclosure Day raises this topic in the public consciousness and helps push back against the stigma, I think it will be doing a real service, again, not only for science, but for national security. I don't want to come to a conclusion. It would be hypocritical of me to say what will occur. I'm more focused in ensuring that there's an objective process. And that's where I think it's important for all of us in the scientific community to use those three critical words, I don't know. So in response to your question, I don't know whether we're dealing with something prosaic or something extraordinary. What I do know is it's worth looking at, that we need to ask the questions, and then we need to follow the scientific process, scientific method, regardless of where it takes us. Hypothetically, if we were to discover something extraordinary to be occurring, I think it could have a great uniting effect on humanity. I think we see this with space exploration. It's why I've dedicated my life to space exploration and space development. It's why my family for 3 generations has done so. Nothing brings us together like looking towards the stars. And if there is an extraordinary activity occurring, that's why I think it's so unfortunate that the public doesn't know, because I think it could unify not only the country, but the world in a way that nothing else can. I think fears relative to UAP are healthy and probably justified. As we look at national security, it is the job of the Department of War to be afraid, to think about the worst case scenario. So I would actually suggest that we embrace those fears and we use it to drive study, to drive progress. When it comes to potential drone attacks and the danger of the stigmatization of UAP, that is a great fear that I have and that people should have. That if you look at the number of drones that Ukraine produces, and please forgive me if I'm a little glib with the facts, but I believe they're in the millions per year that Ukraine produces in terms of drones, and we do 300,000 per year in the United States. That, to me, is a real threat. And the fact that the UAP stigma is in many instances preventing the United States from looking at UAP in a hard and insufficient manner, that makes me afraid. And then finally, if there is something extraordinary occurring and there is extraordinary technology out there, and Secretary Rubio, I think, did an incredible job making this point in the Age of Disclosure documentary, I probably have less fear over what an extraterrestrial civilization might or might not be doing. I don't know what their goals are, but we certainly haven't seen changes in the world because of that. But I do worry about Taiwan. I worry about the way China and Russia treats their people and the denial of freedom, the disastrous state of human rights in those countries. And I worry about the potential of those nations getting ahead of the United States. And Secretary Rubio pointed out that if there is extraordinary technology out there, we're suffering from overclassification, overcompartmentalization, and the stigma. We need to take this issue seriously to prevent technological surprise. I don't lose a lot of sleep over alien invasions. I lose much more sleep over the Red Sox because I know that they're a disaster. The aliens, who knows? If there was some sort of pernicious threat from aliens, I would assume that it would have already manifested. So again, I don't know one way or the other what may or may not be out there, but among all the threats and challenges that we face as a country, that's not something that I worry about. What I do think is of concern is if it is true, as senior national intelligence officials have testified under oath before Congress, that there is potentially extraordinary technology out there, that is a race that we cannot lose to the Chinese or the Russians or even the North Koreans. We cannot let a lack of imagination turn into a lack of freedom. Why should you care about science? Why should you care about technology? Why should you care about national security? UAP involves all of those issues. I actually believe there are a few topics that can be as important as understanding how and if we're in control of our skies, how and if we're responding to adversarial drones, and how and if there's scientific discoveries, technological discoveries to be made. It's a critical topic, and the time has come to take it seriously. One other aspect of the UAP phenomena that I think is important to note, and you probably see this in Bigfoot as well, is that it's not limited to America. This is global. These UAPs and paranormal, it's a global phenomena, and it's particularly important as we talk about national security, as we talk about adversarial drones, that we reach out to our international allies and partners to pool, gather, share information. It was the privilege of my career, if not my lifetime, to develop and lead the Artemis Accords, which has now been signed by 67 nations and is the broadest and most diverse global coalition in history in support of human spaceflight. And there are many nations that take the UAP issue very seriously. When I was part of the NASA UAP Independent Study Team, we received a briefing from CNES, the French space agency. Japan has recently set up or is working to divulge information relative to UAP. So I hope that we can share information globally to improve science, to improve our understanding of the issue, and to improve our understanding of each other. Again, I believe the UAP phenomenon is something that can be a wonderful uniting force for all of humanity to enjoy. I have never seen any kind of UAP personally or had any experiences. However, my father did encounter what he thought might have been Bigfoot footprints while he was working for BIA, Bureau of Indian Affairs, as a soils scientist. And that was certainly interesting, some of the pictures that he took and the information that they gathered. So I would love to know more. I've always been fascinated in the topic because of incidents like that and the relationship between UAP and the Bigfoot phenomenon and paranormal generally. I think it's a fascinating topic. And again, we have to get out of our stovepipes, get out of our rice bowls. And I think everyone in the paranormal community and in the scientific community needs to share information, come together. We're always stronger together.